as Lennon just introduced me there, my name is Andi Brown. I just want to say a quick thank you to Lennon and Michael and all the other organisers for bringing us here today. So my PhD project is called Domestic Violence in the Age of Technology, Analysing the Role of Home Automation. So this focuses on how home automation technology can be co-opted for the perpetration of domestic violence. And when I talk about domestic violence in this context, I'm referring to a broad range of behaviours that include threats, stalking, harassment, put downs, and controlling behaviours, which means telling a partner how and when to do everyday activities. Home automation has recently exploded on the consumer market, but we haven't yet fully considered how centralizing control of our homes via these technologies may result in highly negative consequences for victims of domestic violence. I'm not going to go into specific details about the tech side of home automation, but you do need to understand the basics of this technology in order to really understand how it may give abusive partners a huge amount of control over their victims' lives. Basically, home automation occurs when smart devices are put in a house to automate something. For example, installing a smart light bulb will allow a light in the house to automatically turn on when it gets dark. At the moment, there is a large range of smart devices which can be used for home automation. These include air conditioning, entertainment systems, kitchen and bathroom appliances, security systems such as door locks and alarms, video surveillance, and motion sensors. Smart devices are part of the Internet of Things, also referred to as IoT, because they work by sending and receiving information via the internet. What makes these devices smart rather than just internet connected is that they have sensors built into them, which records data from the environment around them with the intention that this information is used to optimize the performance and overall efficiency of the device. I know household appliance optimization doesn't really sound like something we need to be overly concerned about, but because smart devices are connected to the internet, they can be accessed from anywhere with an internet connection. And that means they can be controlled from anywhere and the data they're collecting can be viewed at any time. Smart devices are the same everyday objects or things that we're used to, but now with tiny computers in them so that they can talk to other computers and make whatever function they serve automatic. Enabling things to be smart is relatively easy to do, and the automation of tasks brings convenience and efficiency, which is why IoT is expanding at such a rapid rate. Worldwide in 2010, there is estimates of approximately 1.84 IoT devices per person, and in 2020 there was 6.58, with this growth continuing to rise rapidly. So the question then is, why is the rise of IoT a concern for victim survivors of domestic violence? And the short answer is that these devices provide further avenues for the perpetration of technology-facilitated abuse. The diagram here demonstrates some hypothetical scenarios about how IoT may be co-opted for nefarious means. And these possibilities will continue to grow as more and more things become smart devices. I know the premise here is that mysterious unknown hackers would be responsible for these actions rather than domestic violence perpetrators, but it's very easy to swap out the perpetrator to make it relevant to the issue at hand. And the fact that that is not readily acknowledged within IoT security discussions is the problem which needs to be addressed.
Let me just interrupt you. You want to swap the display because we can see your notes.
Oh, sorry, thank you. That's helpful. To give a very real example of IoT being co-opted for domestic abuse, a Tasmanian man was recently convicted of cyber stalking his partner by tracking her through an app which received location data from the onboard computer within her car. The IoT technology also gave him the capacity to remotely control the windows, air conditioning, and engine of the car. The victim survivor in the scenario was quoted as saying, "I was in shock and fear for my life when I realized he was stalking me and he had control of my car." She works in the IT sector and only realized her security had been breached when her phone went missing from the car. So she attempted to check the car history log, only to discover the perpetrator had access to her account and was receiving all of her location data. She said, "I had no phone to call for help and I didn't want to tip him off that I was onto him, so I borrowed a phone and called my father." This last part of the quote demonstrates some of the complexity of victim survivors dealing with tech-facilitated abuse, since those seeking help may be cautious about alerting the perpetrator that they've discovered the abuse and may be resistant to cutting off the digital intrusions for fear of escalating abuse or redirecting it to other unknown avenues. This then creates a far more complicated situation where it is not only figuring out how the abuse is being perpetrated, but doing so in a way which doesn't alert the perpetrator and then attempting to monitor or regulate the perpetrator's access to information. Contrary to seemingly logical solutions, it's not as simple as just disengaging from the technology or getting a new device. This example also exemplifies the issue that technology-facilitated abuse can be highly covert, and is not only people lacking technology literacy that can be victimized. The ease with which IoT devices record data and change their environments makes them highly suited as tools for domestic violence, such as stalking, non-consensual image sharing, and gaslighting. These technologies can also be used overtly in the context of coercive control. For example, a perpetrator may coerce a victim survivor into compliance by obviously tracking movements via security systems. Actions such as remotely monitoring and moving cameras to follow victim survivors around the house sends a clear message that there is constant surveillance. These hidden levels of communications are vital to understand when considering how tech can be co-opted for abuse, since technology allows us to communicate and interact in ways beyond anything ever imagined before. To go back to the hypotheticals in the diagram on the right, the lighthearted nature of the scenario about the coffee order being changed demonstrates a further issue of these sorts of actions not being taken seriously as significant intrusions. And while this may seem like a relatively harmless prank in other contexts, within an abusive relationship, any expression of dominance like this could fit into a pattern of controlling behaviors, and undermining the seriousness of these seemingly innocuous actions may place victim survivors at increased risk. Additionally, tech-facilitated abuse is further exacerbated when there is an increased reliance on tech engagement, such as during the COVID pandemic, or for those who have disability and use assistive technologies. Migrant women have also been identified as more vulnerable since they're more reliant on tech to communicate with friends and family overseas, and they may have less knowledge of the laws and rights in their new country. The network nature of IoT means that everything is always in constant communication with each other, heightens the sense of omnipresence, and may make it more difficult for victims to reach out for help since they feel that all of their day-to-day activities, communications, and devices are being monitored. In terms of victims reaching out for help and domestic violence workers being able to provide support, a paradoxical issue arises in the fact that technology has become so pervasive in our lives that victims of tech abuse may not even suspect their devices are playing a role, or worse, that the digital intrusions they're subject to are normal. Younger people in particular have been identified as having problematic attitudes in which they think that sharing location services with their partner and being in constant communication is a normal aspect of their relationship. The fact that people still don't consider their smart devices to be what we traditionally think of computers also contributes to the potential for these devices to be used as surveillance. Sorry, for the surveillance capacities to be overlooked. To put this blatantly, when we think about what devices are accessing our location information, we don't consider our air conditioner at the top of that list. Even when victim survivors do reach out for help, support services face shortcomings in their ability to respond or advise on tech abuse, since those professionals are not technology experts. Hence, this responsibility needs to be shared through domestic violence and cybersecurity practitioners working in tandem to navigate the threats and reduce harm. The problem here is the limited research that's been conducted on this topic tends to silo knowledge, which keeps potential harm and threat reduction actions separate. Other CRIM work being conducted on this topic approaches the problem from a domestic violence perspective and bases work on researchers, advocates, and survivors' knowledge, which leaves tech professionals out of the conversation. In contrast, the research examining the general population of smart home tech users doesn't incorporate discussions of domestic violence. There is still very limited research on people using smart home technology, and we're only just beginning to answer questions about how and why they engage with home automation. So there needs to be more information collected about their demographics and experiences more broadly in order to relate that information to their experiences of domestic violence. Related to the first and second issues is that investigations into tech-facilitated abuse have tended to use sampling methods which can be seen as exclusionary. Criticisms of studies which focus exclusively on teenagers because the researchers proposed that younger people are more likely to be using tech is a clear example of this issue. Finally, because they're historically two completely separate fields, there is a huge divide between domestic violence and technology industry research. This means that despite the fact that domestic violence researchers have identified that smart home tech may be co-opted for abuse, there's a significant lack of attention paid to this threat in general literature on IoT. Dominant discussion on risk associated with smart home tech focuses instead on threats from outside the home, So consideration of how the owner of the technology may co-opt it for harm against another person is essentially non-existent. Within my work, I hope to build on the following knowledge in order to contribute to the corresponding gaps. Firstly, family violence has emphasized perpetrators' drive for control, so we need more research on how tech has increased capacity for abuse by subjecting victims to omnipresence. Secondly, tech-facilitated abuse studies have focused on low-level technologies such as mobile phones and have not restricted the range of experience to the domestic sphere. So my work will look at different technologies and contexts. And in general, previous studies on monitoring and surveillance within the domestic sphere are highly scarce due to the assumption of privacy within the home. So there's been very little research into the capacity for privacy breaches from within the home itself. And therefore my research aims to fill this gap by focusing solely on technology and abuse within the home. And lastly, research into IoT has specifically focused on vulnerability to hacking, which means security risks are deemed to be from outside sources, and there is little information available on how users share tech access. But in the context of intimate partners and multi-user home environments, the persons interacting with the technology are known entities, and so this underexplored threat will need to be examined within my work. And that's all. Thank you very much.